Hello and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And tonight, guys, tonight, I was so much looking forward to it over the past weeks. We have Silas Warren, who was just resetting his headset, and Brian Schwab. And indeed, so today it's all about looking about at the future of presentation. And I have two stellar guests, ex Magic Leap, Brian Schwab and Silas Warren, that have seen this. I remember one quote that stuck with me. I've seen the future. That was actually what Brian told me to once. And that's the reason why we are here to actually share what is some of their knowledge, some of their experiences. Now that we hear that the future of work, the future of interaction and collaboration, it's moving so fast forward. So I think that the knowledge that we're going to share today, tonight, it's going to be super valuable for all of you. And importantly, do not forget to ask questions because this is a great opportunity to actually connect directly. And what we are going to do is that we are going to go. Let's hold on to it. Let's first give the floor to our guest. So, Brian, Silas, why don't you introduce yourself?
You want me to go first, Silas?
Go, Brian. Yeah.
So my name is Brian Schwab. I started out my career as a human in the game industry. I have worked on everything from the Sega Genesis to the PlayStation 4 to my last published title was actually Hearthstone for Blizzard Entertainment. And so I was the AI and gameplay programmer for that. I did a ton of gameplay work, a ton of game design work, a ton of artificial intelligence work. And then eventually I left the game industry for a little while because I wanted a new challenge. And I found that in a very strange company in Florida, of all places, called Magic Leap, where I was a very early member of Magic Leap. I was there for about 6 years, and I ran something called the Interaction Lab, which was effectively Magic Leap's like R&D division, and also sort of like our early prototyping division, where we did a ton of first turn on of features and exploration into how the system worked. And that team actually built itself pretty big. We at one point had a close to 30 members. We probably did 8 or so odd hundred prototypes over the years. Everything you could imagine, every genre of everything we tried at least 6 times. And so we did a ton of exploration and a ton of really good work. And now all those people work for other companies. So we seeded the field really hard. It was a great place to work. And since Magic Leap took its little twist, I have since joined the world's oldest mixed reality company, which is Lego, where we put physical pixels into the world since 1920 or whatever. And so it's been a very exciting new way to think about digital physical mixed goodness in one of the world's largest and oldest toy companies. And so that's where I am now. And so one of the reasons that I care about the topic that we're doing today is because, as Gabriel said, Silas and I really did get to sort of step into the future for quite a number of years and really not just think about it and postulate, but actually work there. And we got to see by building exactly how much better things could be when you had the right tools and you had some of these things. And so I'm somewhat excited to sort of share some of these silliness with you guys directly. So I'll be quiet now.
Awesome, Brian. Thanks for the introduction, and of course, Salas. What about you instead?
Yeah, so my pathway into this world is slightly different than Brian's. But Brian and I were joking that we're kind of both farm boys. We grew up around cows and in a very contextual environments, but kind of our paths went two different areas and then kind of joined together at Magic Leap again. But so I'm currently a creative director of a amazing innovation consultancy called Quest to Know Anyone, and I've been in the kind of industrial design consultancy world my whole career, but took what I called a 2-year sabbatical in South Florida to really dive deep into this new medium of spatial computing. And this is where Brian and I literally sat right next to each other, and we're building crazy things that you could probably only do at that period in South Florida at Magic Leap. So my whole world has been around in this service industry, and part of that service industry is building presentations and communicating and relaying kind of a narrative, building narratives and selling narratives to people. And that was a lot of my job at Magic Leap too, was to really communicate the value of spatial computing, the value of this platform and the operating system to a number of different clients, investors, verticals. And this is where Brian and I kind of really kind of put our heads together and, started to rethink kind of how we were presenting within our own medium of spatial computing, because we were in this habit, I still remember, where we talk about the future of computing, and then we're sitting in a conference room, and then, with some fancy executive, and then pointing at a screen and saying, okay, look at my slide deck as I'm talking about, the future of computing. And so there was something that was a little broken right there, that like our story was a little off. And so Brian and I, with some amazing kind of engineers and prototypers, basically hacked together a solution where someone like myself with no programming or kind of dev knowledge was able to start using the medium in its true form. And I think that's what really kind of opened us up to the kind of like really rethinking this kind of inhuman experience we've been trapped in, which is like literally kind of these, 2-dimensional 16:9 slide decks that I know I spend a lot of my time still doing this. And so as Brian said, we kind of tasted the future, and this really had a dramatic change in this kind of small time down at Magic Leap, and where, my medium and my platform, my apps changed almost within a month or two, where I no longer was using PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides, and really kind of building within the platform and the medium. And you start to realize how much value just looking at assets, looking at content in its authentic form has. And so, yeah, I think this is why we're here chatting about this, because for us, this is something that it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon, where we're all rethinking kind of how we tell stories, how we, work and present and interact with our digital assets and content on a daily basis. And we're going to kind of goof around in a little narrative that we've put together, and show you, hopefully give you some insight into some of the things we've kind of picked up along the years.
And at Shapes XR, our mission is really to create tools that allow people to actually create and communicate in a way that is accessible, but at the same time really try to take advantage of these new spatial mediums, right? So I think that was, in a way, the connection in between all this was this passion for using these technologies and to make them available so that people could actually create and communicate and use those a bit like Lego bricks, right, Brian? So where you can kind of like stack things together and quickly and effectively start communicating and explaining to each other. So today we are going to do something that is a little, that is, let's say, a little tricky in a way to explain, but we are actually going to be in VR in Shapes XR, that is the tool that we have built at Body, to actually show you and give you an impression of how the future of this immersive presentation might look like. And so shortly about Shapes. Shapes is this creation and prototyping tool that will be available as 11/11. That means 1 week from now, around this time, we're going to have a launch party. So follow me on LinkedIn if you want to join. But the idea is that you will be able to, on a quest, to actually go in and start creating. So Brian, that is actually in the UK, Silas, that is right now in New York, and I believe Danilo, a designer that is right now working with Silas, that is in Brazil, we'll all connect in virtual reality, and we will start going through going through that narrative that they have actually built, to give an impression of what's their vision, what are some of the use cases, limitations, power, things that are missing, and things they might want to see. So, and this is happening right now. So why don't we just go in, right? Let's just set this up. And by the way, meanwhile, if people have a specific question, I would encourage you to go ask once in a while. I'll pop my headset up, and then we'll be able to actually answer those. So let me just start streaming and share my screen with you. So I'm gonna share. Okay. Can you guys hear me properly? So it would be great if people can actually confirm, because now this is rather, so I believe people, you guys can see me, but I'm not sure if you can all hear me.
Hey, Gabriel.
Yes, hi. So I've seen Silas and Danilo.
Hey, Gabriel.
Hi, Danilo. Nice to see you. Let me just check that everybody is able to hear me. I'm afraid. So, guys, can you actually hear me? Yes. All good. That is fantastic.
Great.
Thanks, Carlotta. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Stanislav. So I imagine that now it's all good. And I will pop in my headset to make sure that everything is okay. Okay.
Hey, Brian.
So here we are in. Let me just, hi, Brian.
Hello.
You were so far away. Come join us around this table here.
Okay.
Here we are.
So Gabriel, just a quick introduction. Danilo here is our head of design for XR at Question Anyone, and he's going to join us and kind of walk through this quick little narrative that we've set up here to hopefully show you some insight into where we see the world of presentations going.
Hey, guys. Awesome to be here.
Thanks, Danilo. Thanks. And I hear you're also joining us from I thought for a second you were Italian, but instead you're from Brazil. Great to see you.
Yeah, from Brazil.
So yeah, we have an interesting kind of triangle going on throughout the
so
world.
Guys, what are we seeing now on this table?
Yeah, so we really wanted to start off with a more of an explanation of kind of some of our thinking around presentations, and we have a few slides here, which you might recognize as a more traditional medium for us to begin our conversation. So these are some quick slides we pulled up that I'm just gonna grab some of these slides and just gonna position them up over here around us. So first thing is, these are our slides. Very familiar format. We've all gone through this before, but we're going to start off talking about a little bit of the attributes, see some of the needs going, and really kind of do this in a much more traditional format before we start to break this mold a little bit.
Sure. Go ahead.
So yes, so I was just going to start off with this slide over here, which I'll try not to stand on our table too much. And so the kind of, I think we all have built presentations. We don't have to go into the details of this, but to us, there's these very functional needs of presenting, and it can be defined in a lot of different ways. But there's also these kind of human values, these goals for why we present. And I think it's important to realize that over the years, we've been so conformed to our existing tools that we're really at this age of like rethinking both the why and the how we present different things. And it's tools like this and just XR and spatial computing in general that's really going to kind of push this boundary.
Yep. And the thing is like, if you really start to think about presentations in a very generic fashion, you can kind of break them down into different components, right? You've got different ways of authoring, different ways of presenting. The audience can have specific scenarios. You have a whole slew of different types of assets, and then the actual context that you're trying to do things in. That like how are you actually doing the presentation? Is it a single focused TED talk? Is it a space where you're having a concert? Is it even asynchronous or not, right? Where we can step into a room and one at a time go in. And these are all a bunch of different components of presentations, but you can also think about that the relationships between these are also super important, right? And so like, if I have a single presenter with a remote audience, but everybody actually has a little bit of agency and they can stand in a certain place and they can look in a certain way, that's a very different type of presentation than if I have multiple presenters and I only have one audience member and that person can't move at all and can only see certain assets. Like there's a slew of different types of presentations that happen when you start mixing, matching various components as well as various relationships between those components.
And then our last two-dimensional slide, trust me, we're gonna go beyond our dimensions here in a second, but we just thought it would be fun to start with a 2D slideshow in a spatial.
I think that would be a more funnier and yeah, let's say way of doing that. So absolutely.
So, but when we think of like what is a presentation, and when you can now expand it beyond a PowerPoint deck or a keynote, and you start to think about lectures to art gallery displays, to audio tours, to museums, to more traditional kind of design reviews, the world kind of opens up because a lot of these have the same needs. A lot of the same kind of human needs exist, but they kind of change in terms of the interactiveness of it, the mobility of it. Like some like slideshows and board meetings are very stationary versus others like retail exhibits or museums.
By the way, this graph, this graph is actually just a 2D graph of the mobility basically, and how spatial is the actual content, if you will, right? So obviously there's no mobility over here, whereas like retail is walking around in a store, and likewise 2D design reviews and slideshows don't have much spatialness to the content, but trade shows and tour guides are very, very spatial content, right? So this is just a 2D graph of different types of presentations just based off of those two variables by themselves, right? And you can see the spread with just taking into account those two things.
So let's sit around the table, folks, and kind of talk about what we have in our next scene here.
Yes. Let me just check one little thing, guys. I want to make sure that everybody is in here. So quick, I want to make sure. It's okay. I just want to give, because I've realized that people on YouTube can actually know comments, and I want to see if I can fix it. If I can't, it doesn't matter, but it would be good if people that are following us on YouTube could actually ask questions and intervene. Let me just check this. So this is purely 100% live. We are streaming a VR cast. So, I mean, Can you really expect that nothing
So-
goes wrong? No, we are doing good. We're doing good. So let me just, I think we are here. And
Are we putting these back away?
We're putting our slide deck away here, back on the table.
okay. Okay, let's see if now, let me try to see. I know we have 1 second. Sorry, guys, everybody that is watching. And now people on YouTube can chat. So, guys, please, if you have questions or comments, do not hesitate to do so. Now the chat is working. Just refresh the page. So, here we go, guys. Game is on. Yep.
Great. So Gabriel, we're jumping into our
Yes, here
next
I am.
scene here around
Yep,
the table.
I'm on scene 2.
And nice. So what we wanted to show here is some of what I think are the real core attributes of building presentations outside of our traditional 2D medium, because here you see a bunch of lovely things on the table.
Right, I see that.
And the actual content itself doesn't really matter. Like, we're using some of Danilo's amazing work to really kind of tell this narrative, but I think the way we're viewing it and how we're viewing it, and how we're interacting with it, is the huge kind of leap forward to what we're kind of used to. Can you just walk through kind of the process that you went through with just building the spaceship? And I think, Brian, we can grab some of this kind of concept art and work and start to create a little scene, a little war room here.
Yeah, sure. So, hey guys. I'm gonna talk about first 2 things that I think it's really key for immersive experiences. And first one is, of course, the way we're presenting the content, but also the creation part is really awesome to work this in VR. So this entire spaceship I actually did in VR. So I use another software called Gravity Sketch, and I was able here to jump and start basically sketching in space. So just talk a little bit of my process. So you can see all these images around me. I always initially started using putting some reference photos that I can put around me, and also some 2D sketches that I can do on my notebook or any 2D piece, and start just putting them all around me, and then start sketching in space. So here on where I am, when I grab this and try to enlarge, but I did here a quick spatial sketch in the beginning, so just to represent how I normally start my process. And it's really amazing to be able to really just be in this freedom and start sketching and get the proportions right. So to explore ideas, and then start really pulling the surfaces all around until I get to this refined model that you're seeing here. So one amazing thing of VR is actually you can zoom in and start working some of the details. Somehow you're at one time you're just holding a miniature in your hand, and you're just fading, and then you can zoom in on the engine, for instance, and start
Maybe
just
I can put someone
placing
here,
another,
for example, right?
yeah, sure, and adding some other elements around every part, and it's almost like you're there and standing in the spaceship and working in detail. So this is really amazing. And also we can all for instance, if I get to this final design, and we can just make a design review, which is basically what we're simulating here. So we can place all those other images around us, and here you can see some final detail renderings that I can bring to more 2D traditional media and simulate materials, and also putting in a more contextualized scene. So imagine we are working in a movie, and we are reviewing a scene with the director, and we can show this is the shot that we're working on, and the director can really see the shot and also have the model right in front of him, and actually make some annotations and see what's actually working, what is not. And the other cool thing is like having annotations,
Yeah.
so you can come here to the spaceship and actually start just sketching something like, oh, maybe you can add another
Absolutely.
thruster here
There
in the
is
back.
there is actually, guys,
Or
a question coming from the audience. There is here Lord of the Musk. Hey, Brian, Schwab, Zach here from Florida. What if the focus of the stimulus is not in front of all user? Is there a visual cueing to coach the users to stand in the right direction?
So right now we're in shapes to do this particular presentation, to talk you through some of the concepts. But like, if this was going to be a real war room application, right, we would have some semblance of the same back end as this, but like there would be a way to enforce some of those relationships that we talked about between presenter and audience and that sorts of things. And so I would probably also, potentially have spots on the floor that were designated as where audience member 1, 2, 7, whatever goes. And like, I could summon people to spots. I could tell them to look at particular things. Even this pre-render could potentially be like, if I grab a camera sort of
but actually, Brian,
thing, I
if I
could
might,
point it in a
if I might,
certain
if I might
spot.
actually pop in. So this is actually one of the things that is available in Shapes itself. So you see now, guys, that I'm grabbing a head. So people that are now watching the streaming, I can grab the head and set a position. So let's say that I would like to watch this from the top, and then everybody can actually go to the viewpoint number 2, get inside the viewpoint, and everybody will be able to see the scene from that specific perspective. So then you could potentially add more viewpoints, so and do that more. So I think it's a very good point, managing the audience and be able to direct their attention, especially when the scene gets crowded or there are other elements in it. It's very crucial. It's something that moderation has to play a very important role.
For sure. And again, if this was we were really doing some sort of a review on we're working on a movie, I would potentially have a special control that would say, okay, give me a high quality render from here, and now this would show up as the spot where I'm looking at it, and it could give me a straight up hardcore high quality render of the thing we're looking at, and maybe even like as I draw it like tries to incorporate that stuff into the render, because we want to try and see like what it looks like in the final lighting, and what it looks like in the with the all the PBR goodness and what have you. So yeah, try to remember that what you're seeing today is us talking about the future inside of Shapes, and Shapes is an awesome piece of framework to get us partially there. But a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are we're going to ask you to picture that this is working the way that we're saying.
And if I maybe just a little element to the scene, I think that it would be great to have a nice spacey background surrounding us. I think that this is the place to be. What do you think?
Awesome.
So I want to move to the next thing, but I think for us, like the attribute, trying to recreate this experience we just had in a slide deck of reviewing someone's work and progress and having a real kind of collaborative review session and a presentation is almost impossible. Like we've been fighting through this for years and years now of trying to have these sessions, and you start to see the ability of the platforms of XR in general, and how we're basically designing digital content that's meant to be viewed in three dimensions, and yet the only way we actively have to present it now is really in these kind of flat presentations.
And there is actually a good point that Javier is saying, and I want to bring up because he made a good point. So feedback would be great to rethink how the stream is presented to an audience. Seeing this from a first-person perspective, in this case me, Gabriele, makes it very difficult for us watching on a screen to take in the assets that are being shown. So one thing that I would like to add is that, so here the purpose is that if we would want you right now to actually focus on what are the assets. So if I want you to really see at the spaceship right now, then yes, I agree. So the intent of showing you in this way is to give you an impression of how that might feel. right? So, and we might get to, for example, a
Mhm.
third person camera maybe somewhere, but that might not still be ideal because, but how does that feel? How can I see what people can click or what they can do on their UI? So I think you made a good point, and maybe also for the audience that is watching this. So the purpose is not to show you about this spaceship or this asset or this awesome, let's say, landscape that Danilo draw there, but it's more about what will be the process. And this is just the first step. It's about enriching and showing the process and enlarging it, augmenting it with what assets that we are familiar with, in this case, pictures. But I think you brought certainly a good point, Javier.
Yeah. So let's stand around the table, folks, and we're going to jump into our
Let's
next
go.
scene here.
All right.
So we now
Boom.
switch to our next slide. So
And-
you guys see that what I'm doing here is I'm switching between different, what are the slides. So this is the system that we have built to kind of tell stories. So I was in space number 1, now in 2, and now we are all number 3, where I see a city here and a spaceship flying on my left.
Yes. So here we are with, again, the same digital assets. Again, they're interchangeable. This could be, a retail experience. It could be a museum experience. We happen to use an amazing concept spaceship. But here, one of the core attributes of really thinking about spatial presentations in general is just being unlocked by being kind of freed from using a certain scale, whether it's a 16:9 ratio or kind of where we can really start to change the context of what we're presenting in. And so we kind of imported a little city experience, and now you can think about the same content, the same narrative, but completely flip the context on the audience member. So before we're kind of more talking about the actual assets and the renderings and the different types of assets. And here we see, okay, now put this into a citywide context. What does this look like?
And that is where I really believe that VR adds most of the value. I think when you start looking at space and so very often there is a focus on products or object, and less often there is a focus on how those product or object are located in the broader environment. So I think this is actually one of the a very great example. And Brian, I see you moved away from here. Where are you?
Yeah, I wanted to come over and give you a viewpoint here. If you jump to viewpoint 3, now you're sitting over here by these people on the street, and you're looking up at a full size spaceship that's potentially gonna fly around in a scene that we're setting up. And so we're now slightly past the point of saying, okay, here's an asset, here's how we created it, here's how we're going to iterate on it, and now, like, how is this asset going to be used in a more realistic scene that we're going to be blocking out as well, right? And we can look at eye lines directly. We can look at can that thing maneuver through this city scene while it's being used in the whatever movie we're working on, and getting people's heads in the context of how the asset is going to be used is much easier if the content is vastly different scale than normal. If they can look at it directly in this manner, in the natural way in which they would see it in its environment, right? And this is not something that you can do really with a slide.
Of course.
With a slide.
Guys, I do have
right.
Yeah, please.
And especially if you want people to be able to see it in different scales, I want to be able to sort of see from city view, and I also want to be able to like get into the cockpit as if I was flying the ship. That's not going to be something unless you spend a heck of a lot of time with a bunch of different renders and let people kind of just see a buttload of different images. But they're still not going to get the feel of the scale. I actually worked with ILM for a while when they were first working on the Vader Immortal stuff, and almost nobody that originally jumped into that work understood that Darth Vader is about 7 feet tall.
I tried it
right?
for the
And
first
so everybody
time.
walked in there and like
I
went
tried
like
it for the
this.
first time
And you were like,
yesterday.
holy hell.
I tried actually no joke. I tried Vader Immortal, no joke, and with my mother actually, and she's a big Star Wars fan. She said, "No, I'm not gonna stand there. Why? What's the problem? He's so tall. What are you saying?" I put on the headset, and she was like, "Okay, you are right. He's a pretty big, intimidating ass."
Yeah, I don't think anybody understood that, and so like it was one of the things that I think a lot of people learned about
Yeah.
Darth Vader by playing that game.
And by the way, I think I have a question from Sean, right? And he's bringing an interesting point, right? So this works brilliantly when you want to present 3D asset, but how do you use this if your product is, for example, insurance or something more abstract? So wait a second, Danilo, could you mute a second?
Sure.
I think you have a little bit of return on your left controller. There is the microphone. If you tap it,
Oh,
yeah,
got it.
thanks.
Tell Sean that we're going to get there in a little bit.
Sean.
So tell him that right now what we're trying to show is a little bit of a narrative where we're
Right.
talking about different scales and different environments, and that we're eventually going to get towards other difference.
Sean,
right? So right
we're
now
gonna get there. That is
we're
basically the
still en
answer.
route.
Great. So
Yeah. So just one last before we jump to our next unit. To me, this idea of being able to switch contexts of whatever narrative or whatever assets you're presenting, and so you think about building experiences for retail environments or museums, galleries, or even hospitals, operating theaters. The context is important for what you're presenting in, and being able to put your narrative, your assets, your content into that context, whether it's a spaceship or a two-dimensional asset or even a sound asset, a sound file, you change the audience's perspective of how you kind of perceive that information. And so this to me, the huge benefit is like we haven't changed anything with the asset. It's the same original asset that we have created, but now we're kind of switching between these different contexts, these different narratives.
right. And again, right, I think it really iterates on what's the importance of seeing an object, but seeing also the object in function or in space. And I think especially in that early stage of the design process, when you start still thinking and discussing with people, that is just huge value, because so easily you could say, okay, but what if, for example, we have maybe two cities here? What if we make it so now I'm creating a duplicate, and what if the scene is, for example, different and is, for example, like this, and so now people are gonna see me playing around, and what if it's like this, and people feel more maybe surrounded, right? So you can at that stage super quickly actually put around. And I see Danilo that is actually sketching a chase here. let me group these up and get it here. Here we go. Yeah, here we go.
Oh, you almost got all of it.
Almost. Yeah, but so indeed, I think that's a brilliant point. And especially indeed in this, when you're early on and you still have to talk and discuss about this. And I see Silas is actually flying a ship.
I'm trying to help out our comrade here.
Let's shoot some laser.
So shall we?
Yes, let's go to the next one.
So the point is that this isn't just about visuals, right? Like we start there, like everybody starts. You start with what you know, and when we talk about like viewing and manipulating objects and 3D stuff, this is brilliant, obviously. But now what we're trying to show is that now we're talking about using it in different contexts, using it in different scales, using it in different places. So like let's go to our next slide. Because the next slide,
join us around the table here.
We have a new room. Yeah.
The next slide wants to speak to one other point of future, which is that it's not always about some fantastical VR environment. It's not about some imagined city. A lot of where we're going with the new tech is pixels anywhere, right? Pixels in your house directly. And so, yes, here we are with our sort of point of origin that we keep going back to, but this same exact prototyping tool, the same exact type of presentation, we can do it in a real place. And we can prototype that sort of thing in the same immersive environment. But this could be, in effect, a digital twin of your actual living room, right? And so now we can start talking about, do various assets fit at various scales in this room? Can we match the lighting for this room directly? Can we use these as occluders so that, like, when something flies around the corner, it actually gets occluded in the right way? And suddenly this content is respecting the rules of the physicality of a real space, so that when I actually see this presentation in this room in a pass-through environment instead of in a VR environment, it's solidly rooted in that room, which is going to make it feel much more like mixed reality as opposed to virtual reality.
Right. And actually, if maybe also to give that impression, I'm gonna show on helping this viewpoint that is actually offset, and this is how you would experience this room, right? So you will notice that, for example, there is a tight focus on the screen, but then that will be the first thing that you see, but maybe that shape might move across and so on, but then you have this indeed spatial impression about what you are experiencing.
Yeah. And so we see this as this next stage, using our kind of our real world as the foundation to the canon narrative, and using the same that we walked through in kind of both the war room setting and kind of showing scale. Here we are in this, yes, it's on VR, but we're pretending this is your living room. Imagine this kind of, dynamic map that is constantly kind of generating data that's feeding into the assets we're putting in here. So now, as like Brian was saying, is like, we can see how our digital content interacts with the physical, visit to even to kind of the lighting environments or sound environments or other people moving through the space. And that when you rethink what a digital asset really is, and it becomes, in a sense, more human, because we're looking at it, we're interacting with it with more senses, with all of our senses, as opposed to, again, just seeing the same narrative on a 2D screen.
I mean, and here's the thing: when you start really getting into XR tech, almost everybody has a particular journey. What we found is that developers and even consumers alike have kind of a journey, a change management, if you will, of mental thinking about it. And we sort of followed it a little bit in this conversation that we've been having, right? Most people tend to start with, let's talk about a tabletop sort of scenario, because a tabletop, to a certain weird extent, sort of represents like a screen that is like laying there, and there's digital stuff on top of it, and it makes a lot of sense to people. It's an easy sort of first step into XR sort of thinking. And then you start to think about rooms, right? You start to think about, like, what about the war room, right? And surrounding myself with a lot of different types of content, and I start to be able to move around a little bit more and like enjoy the space. And then you start really going berserk. People usually go to something city scale or something big or something small or something both, and they sort of whiz around and they start talking about animated objects, and they start talking about, a bunch of different parts of reality. And usually they come back to try and like actually do something in actual reality. And that's why, once you've really experimented with like what it means to do locomotion in space and what it means to actually use different scales of things, then suddenly you get to this next challenge area where it's about, how do I respect actual reality while still having all of this digital goodness, right? And so like now, having the ability to sort of build the same stuff that you're going to do in big, wide sweeping VR type things, and still be able to do all your prototyping for a real reality-based thing in the same scenario is super, super cool. Because the biggest thing that XR is going to give us is not pixels wherever the heck we want. It's the fact that we're actually in a fairly nice, powerful computing environment. And yes, part of what the computer can do is generate pixels, but it can also take into account our reality and the rules and systems that we use in reality, and start to actually present things not just visually realistically, but we can start talking about other ways to use the compute that's floating around us, as well as all the pixels that are floating around us, right? And that's what we're going to show in the next slide.
Let's go. And I think also, if I want to chip in, so right now we see that there is a lot of this, of course, interest in merging that digital layer with our real world, and we really believe that having something like this where you can quickly iterate and start creating can really make a huge difference. Because if I would want, for example, I could say, okay, hey, oops, someone moved the room.
Sorry,
Someone, no problem.
I picked
Someone
up the
could say, hey, maybe I would like a UI here, all right, and maybe I would want some of the controls here, for example, right? And now I'm building something fairly quick, but just to give you an impression. And then you might say, okay, is that where I would want it to be? Right? Is that if I would want some elements that is coming out of this of this movie, would I want it to go where? Should it go on my table? But what if the actual the room doesn't have a table? So, and you can start having these conversations. So I think that this is in a way one of the reasons also to start creating and thinking in a space like this. But please, Brian, I didn't want to cut you off.
No worries at all. So like I said,
Let's,
now what we want to do is show you like a radically different sort of scenario in the next slide. And here we're sort of back at our table, right? Here's our table with our model, and what I want to show you now is, like, I want to take a presentation to the next sort of end level, if you will, which is don't think of it as just a presentation. Think of what we really have going on here is effectively a 3D engine that's networking us all in, and we can have access to assets. We also have access to compute, right? And so what we're talking about now is setting up a full work stream, where, yes, I have an observation table here, just like normal. Here's to the question earlier. Here's some spots on the floor where maybe I can summon people over to the observation table. Hey, let's go check this out, and bang, 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 and we can do that kind of thing. But if I just turn around over here, there's another workstation with a little crazy ass UI that I popped together in about 4 seconds, just for giggles, where inside of this box, because the app that this quote unquote presentation system is built into, inside of this box, I have essentially a physics model running.
Let me add a little bit of
testing
transparency.
the aerodynamics of. I'm testing out the aerodynamics of the thing, and I can start it up. I can change colors of stuff. I can change the wind velocity or something, and then I can move my ship around and watch how the aerodynamics change, because I can have a running physics simulation in here. And meanwhile, I can have somebody over at the observation table maybe add another laser, and now suddenly I can watch the aerodynamics change directly, right? And we can talk about like the asset in a systemic dynamic way, right? And likewise, over here I've got another giant block of workflow here, where this set right here is the big, a large part of the actual game engine that I was going to potentially use this asset is running inside of this block. And so, like, I can add ships, I can speed time up and down, and these guys are all running around in here having a dogfight, let's say. At any given point, I could point at one, and I've got a selector here, and I click on him, and that shows me some output maybe over here on a little debug log window that's running. So that ship number 3 now has stuff showing up, and maybe it even gives me an icon right here where if I click on that guy, I jump into the simulation, and now I'm piloting this directly, and now I can test out flying the ship directly as a person in the sim. In the meantime, all of these are going at the same time, right? So like the design review is going on. I'm sitting in here flying around a corner. I ask somebody to add a laser or change a parameter on something so that like I can go, you know what? I can kill 3 ships way faster if the timing on the laser is different, right? And meanwhile, the person over here can like summon somebody else to the meeting. They can like send a message to somebody, and we can be iterating on a system at the same time that we're iterating on the art, at the same time we're iterating on this. And part of why this is important, part of why this is so life-changing, is because presentations have always been a way to try and get complicated visuals, complicated ideas into the minds of people that don't maybe have the best imaginations, or they don't have a lot of time to do all the research so that they can see all the angles that people can give them. And so we spend a lot of time making decks so that we can get people that maybe don't have a ton of vision to sort of see what some of us are looking at on a daily basis, right? And presentation decks end up being super important to even get the most simplest ideas across. But when you start talking about complicated systems that are all sort of interlinked together, and they're heavily physics based, and sometimes they're at radically different scales, suddenly this is really the only way that you can get people to actually understand what it is that you're trying to sell them on. If you can not just show them visually, but you can show the assets in the context and in the systems that you're talking about trying to get them into. And so we can not only work here, but we can actually show people that had a hard time seeing, slide decks,
Right.
that had a hard time seeing ideas without slide decks. Now, like this is almost completely vital when you start talking about the types of complicated notions that require big spatial systems to really show off well.
Gabriel, the one that, like, for me, coming more from the design side and less from the programming side, the amazing thing is realizing how just kind of trapped and confined we've been with kind of interacting and trying to present and convince people through the tools and the mediums we have, where all of a sudden if we're looking at the digital content through these new perspectives with these kind of different types of attributes now layered into like what we're trying to kind of mock up here, where it's no longer just a pure kind of visual presentation, but we start really trying to kind of inform and convince people and really try to bring the audience into what we're thinking, what we're trying to present. We're not changing the assets necessarily. It's the same assets we're creating. We're providing a much more kind of natural context for them to live in a sense. And so to me, this is where it becomes a much more kind of human way to kind of experience these narratives, as opposed to us trapped behind our laptop, which we all have been probably for the last number of years.
So to answer the insurance question, right? Like I maybe have just a meeting space where people get together and we talk. Like to a certain extent, you could call the design review where it's just me and Silas and somebody and a piece of asset here. You could call this the sort of like lowest hanging fruit co-presence. We're present in the same place as our asset, right? So like if we had to do insurance, maybe we have some data that we're looking at and we're talking about it, and we can take notes together and we can do some things. But the interesting thing is that we are in a ubiquitous computing scenario, right? So maybe the best way to actually see that insurance data is a running, sort of data viz system that like I can tweak things and show like how our
parameters or age
profits are going to go up or down in a certain way in a much more dynamic fashion. That's easier to sort of like communicate when you talk about like, look, if we increase our advertising dollars by this much, we're going to get this much more reach, and we're going to be able to get this much. Like saying that doesn't have half the ability of a good data viz system to sort of show that directly, especially if it's dynamic and people can kind of like use the compute power that's floating around right now to not only be co-present, but to start having very directed, contextual, compute rich conversations,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of the concepts that we're trying to communicate are not static, and they're not, sort of like rule based. They're very dynamic, and they're very, very complicated. And so just getting in the same place and being co-located, that's important, but it's like the very first step. Starting to actually use the computer to demystify some of those connections and some of those complexity with the ability to sort of like see the dynamic behavior happen while we're talking about it. That's where you start talking about like, so that's not just a 3D assets sort of scenario. It's a way of doing visualization of almost any data set is going to be improved if you have the right tools and the right ability to sort of introspect that data in the right way. And having a computer around and having the ability to sort of like dig into things is really the way in which that's going to happen.
Guys, we do have 5 more minutes, so why don't we maybe go back to reality and maybe try to see if there is any quick questions before we close.
Yeah.
Should we do that? So
Danilo?
Bye,
Danilo.
Danilo. Thank you very much for being here.
Bye, Danilo.
And for this amazing spaceship. I prefer yellow. No, too yellow.
I noticed I was on mute.
Hi, Danilo. It was a pleasure.
So,
Bye.
thank you, guys.
Thanks for
See you.
coming.
All right.
Bye.
And we are back. Can you guys hear us?
We all have our VR burn.
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question from Ben James. Question is, Silas and Brian, you are a wonderful and dangerous team. What's the next for you in bringing the vision of spatial presentation to life?
I mean, for me, what we...
Is it muted?
Oh,
No. I think it's me. Wait a second. Okay, go ahead.
For me personally, what I've been trying to do is reach out to folks that are doing collaborative tools like Shapes and trying to help show them some of the feature sets that are going to take them past that co-presence notion into more of a co-working, collaboration kind of beautiful environment where we can start to like really push the boundaries of presentations, right? Because presentations are everything from rock concerts to museum pieces to full workflows, like we talked about at the end there.
Thanks for the question, Ben. We'll reach out to you separately, but no, I think for me, and this is a more honest response, is that part of it is like convincing our audience and our clients and the people we're presenting to that there's a way beyond like these kind of, these formats we've been living in the last 30 years. And so to me, it's baby steps. And I think this is like VR is that first step because, we can go out and buy a $300, $400 headset as opposed to a $3,000, pass-through device. And so I think it's these baby steps of really showing people kind of the way to kind of look and experience this content in a much more natural human way.
So
I mean, the thing is, let me say one more quick thing about that.
Sure.
And I've used this metaphor before. So the very first television programs were just radio programs with a camera pointed at them. When you go from one major medium to the next, it's very difficult, that transition, both from a consumer standpoint as well as an authoring standpoint, right? And so those early radio shows were just people singing and dancing or whatever, and then TV just came along and they like, okay, so they just put a camera and they pointed it at the people singing and dancing, and that was the vast majority of early television shows. And it took a really long time for the sort of like 3 camera, multiple sets, jump cuts, over the shoulder, talking about blah, blah, blah. All of that came years and years later as people started to expand and really get to the point where they understood that there's a massive difference in telling stories when you have the ability to put field view and positions and different sets and have visuals. And we're in that same spot right now where like people know how to tell stories on a screen. People somewhat know how to tell stories in VR. And we're getting to that point where they're now hopefully going to start being able to tell stories in other ways and other ways and other ways. And so when we make this weird transition from what you know to where you don't, that part of the reason we're doing that is because we're trying to, as Silas is saying, we're trying to show that those steps a little bit, because we want you to see that like eventually you don't need to just have that radio singer sitting there with a camera pointed at it. There's other hugely awesome and hugely compelling things out there.
I mean, I also want to be honest. I think that right now a lot of the bottleneck is also lies in the tools. And look, I don't want to say because okay, we've built this tool, and so of course you gotta say it. But I mean, it's just a word that is not very accessible to a lot of the creatives that can actually be there and start thinking and sharing their things, right? So we have a lot of people that are very brilliant, but it's just so close, right? And it just feels so threatening. So that is one of the reasons why we're really building Shapes XR, and it is because to allow people to actually start participating without having the fear that they need to. It takes years to learn something, but you can have this conversation and make an impact, and maybe sell your idea about an XR app to your boss without building it, because you can put him in the headset and you can show him how that's gonna feel at a very early level, right? But at that stage, when you still have to pitch, when you still have to just communicate or maybe build something quickly to show to a developer, that is something that you need. You need something quick. So that is really why we are so excited about ShapeXR and about next week's launch. So I mean, I think we are just about the hour. And I mean, I wanted to thank you. I want to thank Silas and Brian and Danilo for joining us. Because it was really a pleasure, and I think being guided through that narrative kind of like makes people think, right? Let's try to think. Okay, now we are around the table. Well, what else could we do? Could we surround ourselves with something? Could we put what we are talking in space? And what if that something goes back into our space? How is that going to influence? I think I would encourage everybody to actually start questioning the way we are using this medium, really, because that's going to create new ideas. And please share, engage. I would love to hear from you guys what you think. So, Silas, Brian, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was a real pleasure, and I certainly look forward to more things coming up. Because Brian, firm believer in this, Silas and Danilo, it was a pleasure to have you, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna have many more of these VR opportunities too.
Definitely. Well, thank you for having us. And this is just the beginning, where it's like the dawn of a new age, and we're just getting started. So we'll definitely see a lot more of us.
Absolutely.
And by the way, anybody in the audience, feel free to reach out to me or Silas. I'm sure off to the side. We're both totally open. So come on, ask questions down the road.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Thanks for everybody that joined in tonight. Stay tuned for next week launch of Shapes XR. We have a launch party live like this one. You'll be able to join actually in VR with me, with our CEO, with whoever is going to join in. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Bye guys, and have a great night. Bye Brian. Bye Silas.